There is a certain kind of book that does not shout at you. It does not try to impress you with complicated ideas or drown you in theories you will never use. Instead, it sits beside you, quietly, the way a trusted friend does, and says exactly what you needed to hear at exactly the moment you needed to hear it. Daily Strength for Daily Needs, written by Mary Tileston and first published in the late 1800s, is one of those rare books. It has outlasted empires, survived 2 world wars, passed through the hands of grieving mothers and exhausted soldiers and hopeful young people standing at the edge of their futures, and it has never once stopped being relevant. That is not a coincidence. That is the mark of something true, and the truth it carries is simple, almost dangerously simple, the kind of simple that people in complicated times tend to overlook. It says that every single day you are given exactly enough strength, enough grace, enough light to take the next step. Not the whole staircase, just the next step. That idea, small as it sounds, has the power to change everything about how you move through your life. So let us spend some time with this book together. Not rushing through it, not skimming the surface, but actually sitting with what it offers. Because what it offers is not just information, it is a way of seeing, a way of breathing, a way of waking up in the morning without the weight of the whole world already pressing down on your chest. Mary Tileston structured this book as a daily devotional, meaning it was designed to be read one day at a time, one entry per morning. Each entry contains a brief selection of scripture, followed by a few carefully chosen quotations from poets, theologians, mystics, and writers across centuries. She drew from voices as varied as George Herbert and John Ruskin, from Fenelon and Thomas à Kempis, from quiet corners of literature that most people would never find on their own. She gathered all of it into one place, like a woman collecting wildflowers, and arranged it so that each day of the year had its own small bouquet. But the summary we are going to explore together today is not just a list of what the book contains. It is something closer to what the book feels like, what it does to a person who actually reads it, day after day. What changes slowly and then all at once when you begin to believe that strength really does come fresh every morning. Let us start at the beginning, which is also where every good thing starts. January, the cold, bare, stripped-down start of a year when most of us are carrying either too much hope or too much dread, sometimes both at the same time. Tileston opens the year not with a motivational speech, not with a challenge or a resolution, but with an invitation. She invites you to rest. She invites you to remember that you did not make the world, you do not hold it together, and the responsibility of keeping the universe running is not, in fact, yours. That might sound obvious, but be honest with yourself for a moment. How often do you walk through your days as if it were? How often do you lie awake at night running through lists of everything that could go wrong, everything you should have done differently, everything you still need to fix? Most of us do this more than we would like to admit. Tileston sees that. She saw it in the 1800s. And human nature has not changed so much that she cannot still see it in us today. Return again and again to the idea of surrender. Not surrender in the way a soldier surrenders, in defeat and shame, but surrender the way a river surrenders to the ocean. The river does not stop being a river, it does not disappear, it simply stops fighting against the direction it was always meant to go. There is a quote in the early pages, drawn from the writings of Fenelon, a French archbishop who lived in the 1600s, and who understood human restlessness the way only someone who had wrestled with his own could, and he wrote something along the lines of this, that peace comes not from the absence of trouble, but from the presence of God in the trouble. That is a sentence worth sitting with, because most of us spend enormous amounts of energy trying to get rid of the trouble. We think if we could just solve that problem, pay off that debt, fix that relationship, get that job, lose that weight, then we would finally feel at peace. Fenelon, and Tileston, who carries his words forward, gently but firmly suggest otherwise. Peace is not on the other side of your problems, it is available to you inside of them, right now in the middle of the mess, if you are willing to stop fighting long enough to receive it. That is a hard thing to hear, and an even harder thing to believe. But this book does not ask you to take it on faith in one giant leap, it asks you to take it one day. Just one, just today. As the book moves into February, the tone shifts slightly. The winter is deeper now, and the entries begin to address something that almost every human being will face at some point, which is the experience of waiting. Waiting for something to change. Waiting for an answer that has not come. Waiting in a situation that feels permanent but cannot be, and yet the days keep passing and nothing is different. And you begin to wonder if you missed something, if you did something wrong, if maybe the good thing you were hoping for is simply not meant for you. Tileston does not rush past this. She does not offer cheerful platitudes about how everything happens for a reason and just be patient and it will all work out. Those words, however well-intentioned, have a way of making a suffering person feel even more alone because they skip over the reality of what waiting actually costs. Instead, she stays in the waiting with you. She brings in the voice of George MacDonald, the Scottish author whose work influenced C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, among others. And MacDonald writes about waiting as a form of trust that goes deeper than any other. He suggests that when you are waiting, and you do not know why, when the waiting makes no sense and feels like waste, that is precisely the moment when something is being built in you that could not be built any other way. Patience is not passive, he implies. It is one of the most active things a human soul can do. There is a story I want to share here, because I think it captures what February in this book is really about. There was a young woman, a teacher, who had spent 3 years applying to a doctoral program she desperately wanted to get into. She had done everything right. Her grades were excellent, her recommendations were strong, her writing sample was good, and every year she got a letter saying she had not been accepted. By the third rejection, she was not just disappointed. She was broken. She had started to believe that the rejection was a message not just from an admissions committee, but from life itself. That she was not good enough. That she had misread herself. That the dream had been foolish from the beginning. And then, in the middle of that third winter, a friend gave her a copy of Daily Strength for Daily Needs. She did not read it all at once. She barely believed it would help, but she started reading one entry every morning before she got out of bed, and something began to shift. Not the circumstances, those took longer. But her relationship to the circumstances began to change. She stopped treating the waiting as evidence against her and started, slowly, treating it as a season. Seasons end. They always end. And when she was finally accepted to a different program, one she had not even applied to originally, one that turned out to be a far better fit for the research she actually wanted to do, she said she understood something she had not understood before. She said she understood that the 3 years of waiting had not been wasted. They had been used. That is the February promise of this book. Your waiting is not wasted. Something is being built. Spring arrives in the pages of Tileston's work with a kind of relief that feels earned, because the reader has sat through the cold months with her, and now the March and April entries come with fresh energy. These months focus on something that might seem simple but is actually one of the most transformative forces in a human life, and that is the practice of gratitude. Not gratitude as a performance, not the kind you post about to seem like a good person, but gratitude as a lens, a way of seeing that, when practiced consistently, actually changes the structure of your inner world. Tileston draws on a wide range of voices here, including the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who wrote about the earth being so full of heaven that only those who see it are moved by it, while others just sit and eat blackberries. That image has always stayed with people who encounter it because it is so precise and so honest. The difference between a person who is moved by their life and a person who merely moves through it is not circumstance. It is attention. It is whether you have trained yourself to notice the beauty that is already present, or whether you have gotten so used to looking past it in pursuit of something you do not yet have. This is not toxic positivity. Tileston is not telling you to pretend that bad things are good or that pain does not hurt. She is telling you something more subtle and more powerful than that. She is telling you that gratitude and grief can coexist, that you can be heartbroken and still find something to thank the morning for, that noticing beauty does not erase sorrow, it just makes sure that sorrow does not erase everything else. The April entries in particular carry this message with great tenderness. There are selections about renewal, about the way that spring follows winter in nature without anyone having to force it, and the invitation is to trust that the same law operates in human life. You do not have to force your own renewal. You cannot force it, actually. What you can do is stay open to it. Keep your hands open instead of clenched. Keep showing up. Keep turning toward the light, even when the light seems very far away. By the time the book reaches the summer months, something interesting happens. The tone becomes less about surviving and more about living. The June and July entries explore what it means to actually inhabit your life, rather than just endure it. Tileston includes writings about joy, about work, about the dignity of everyday tasks, and about the way that even the smallest moments of an ordinary day carry within them the possibility of something sacred. There is a thread that runs through this section about work, specifically about the meaning of ordinary work, the kind most of us do every day that does not feel particularly heroic or significant. She draws from John Ruskin, the Victorian art critic, who wrote with great passion about the value of doing small things with care. He believed that the quality of attention you bring to whatever you are doing is the quality of attention you bring to your life, and that a life of distracted, half-hearted engagement with small things produces a kind of inner poverty, regardless of how outwardly successful that life might appear. Conversely, a person who does their ordinary work with full presence and genuine care is practicing something that looks simple but is actually one of the highest forms of living. This idea, in the middle of a warm, unhurried summer section, lands differently than it would at the beginning of the year. By now, if you've been reading day by day, you have already been through the cold, the waiting, the slow arrival of hope. And so when Tileston says, through Ruskin and others, that the ordinary is where the sacred lives, it does not sound like a consolation prize for people who never got what they wanted. It sounds like an invitation to stop missing what is already yours. The August entries take a quieter turn. There is something about late summer, the heaviness of it, the heat and the fullness, that lends itself to reflection. And that is exactly what Tileston invites in these pages. She turns toward the interior life. She brings in voices that speak about prayer, not prayer as a religious obligation or a transactional negotiation with the universe, but prayer as conversation, as presence, as the simple act of turning your attention toward something larger than yourself and staying there for a moment without an agenda. She quotes Thomas à Kempis, the medieval mystic who wrote The Imitation of Christ, and his understanding of prayer is so stripped of performance and pretense that it feels almost shockingly modern. He writes about how God does not need your elaborate words or your perfectly structured petitions. He writes about how the cry of a heart that is simply honest, simply present, simply there, reaches further and lands more surely than any polished speech. There is a comfort in that for people who have ever felt that they were not doing prayer correctly, that they did not know the right words, that their faith was too messy or too uncertain to be taken seriously. Tileston, through a Kempis, says no, bring the mess, bring the uncertainty, bring exactly what you have, because that is exactly what is wanted. This is around the 10-minute mark of sitting with this book, and I want to pause here to say something. If you have found any part of what we have covered so far to be meaningful, if something has resonated or settled into a quiet place inside you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Audiobook Library channel. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more people who might need exactly what we are offering here. These summaries take real time and care to create, and every like, every subscription, every comment you leave makes it possible to keep going. So if this is serving you, please let it serve others too, by sharing it forward. Now, back to where we were. September in this book is extraordinary. It is where Tileston begins to address something that most devotional writing of her era tended to shy away from, which is the reality of suffering that does not have a clear explanation. Not the suffering that comes from bad choices or neglected relationships, but the kind that arrives without warning and without apparent cause, the illness that strikes a good person, the loss that comes to someone who had already lost so much, the grief that does not lift no matter how much time passes or how hard you pray. She does not explain it away. She does not offer a theology of suffering that makes it all make sense in a neat and satisfying way. What she does instead is remarkable. She gathers, from centuries of human experience, the voices of people who went through fire and came out the other side still believing that they were held. Not that the fire was good, not that the burning did not hurt, but that something held them inside it. She quotes Hannah Whittle Smith, the Quaker writer whose book The Christian Secret of a Happy Life became one of the best-selling religious books of the 19th century, and Smith writes about what she calls the will of God as a pillow. She uses that image, a pillow, not a battering ram, not a lesson, not a punishment, but a pillow, something that supports you when you are most exhausted and most undone. That image has comforted an extraordinary number of people over many generations, and Tileston includes it here because she understands that when a person is in the middle of unexplained suffering, the last thing they need is an argument. What they need is a hand. She offers the hand, through these carefully chosen words, from people who have been where you are and have something real to say about it. There is another story I want to bring in here. There was a man, a father, who lost his teenage son in an accident, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon that became the dividing line of his life, the before and the after, the world that was and the world that replaced it. In the months after his son died, he could not sleep, could not work, could not find a single reason to get out of bed in the morning that felt real. A grief counselor he was seeing suggested he try reading something small every day, just a paragraph, just enough to give his mind somewhere to rest other than the loop of grief. He picked up Daily Strength for daily needs almost at random, and he has said since then that he did not believe a word of it at first. He read it the way you eat food when you have no appetite, mechanically, because someone told you that you needed to. But slowly, over weeks and then months, something in him began to respond, not to the theology, not primarily, but to the honesty, to the fact that the book did not pretend that everything was fine or that loss could be reasoned away. It just kept showing up day after day with something that said, "You are not alone in this. People have been here before you. They survived. They even found moments of peace. You might too. He did. It took years. It still hurts. But he did." That is what September in this book is about. It is about the kind of strength that is not the absence of weakness, but the stubborn, quiet presence of something that holds you when you cannot hold yourself. October arrives with a new theme, and it is one that often gets overlooked in discussions of spiritual or personal development, and that is community. The October entries in Tileston's book return again and again to the idea that human beings are not meant to make this journey alone. We were made for each other. We were made to carry each other's weight, to share each other's burdens, to be the hands and voice and presence of something divine for one another. She draws on the letters of John Newton, the former slave trader who became an abolitionist and wrote the hymn Amazing Grace, and Newton writes about friendship with an intimacy and vulnerability that is genuinely surprising for a man of his time and background. He writes about how being known by another person, truly known, not just the polished version but the whole complicated truth of who you are, is one of the greatest mercies of a human life. He writes about how isolation corrodes the soul in ways that solitude does not. There is a difference, he notes, between chosen quiet and enforced loneliness, and the enforced kind, the kind that comes from shame or from circumstances that have cut you off from others, requires specific grace to survive. Tileston pairs this with voices from mystics who wrote about the spiritual practice of seeing the divine in other people, not in the people who are easy to love, not in the ones who are already kind and generous and put together, but in everyone. In the difficult ones, the needy ones, the ones who take more than they give, the ones who irritate and exhaust you. She does not say this is easy, she says it is the work. The actual, concrete, daily work of a life oriented towards something larger than personal comfort. This October section of the book also addresses something particularly relevant to our times, even though Tileston wrote more than a century ago. She writes about the danger of comparison, about the way that measuring your life against someone else's life produces a kind of internal violence that leaves you feeling perpetually behind, perpetually not enough, perpetually cheated. She quotes a variety of writers on this, all of whom make the same central observation: comparison is not accurate. You are comparing the inside of your life to the outside of someone else's, and that will never produce an honest result. Your inside knows all the fear and the struggle and the doubt. Their outside shows only the finished product. It is not a fair comparison. It never is. The invitation in October is to come back to your own life, to stop looking over the fence and start looking at what is actually in your own yard, which may be simpler than what you see next door, but which is genuinely yours, genuinely suited to you, and genuinely full of possibility if you will pay attention to it. As the book moves into November, the season itself carries meaning. The trees are bare, the days are short, the year is winding down, and there is something about this time of year that naturally turns us toward reflection, toward accounting, toward asking the big questions that we tend to avoid when we are busy and distracted. What has this year been for? What has changed in me? What do I still carry that I should have put down? What do I still need that I have been too proud or too afraid to ask for? The November entries in Tileston's book are some of the most searching and honest in the entire collection. She does not let the reader coast here. She brings in voices that challenge, that push, that ask hard questions without wrapping them in comfortable packaging. She includes writings from Andrew Murray, the South African minister whose books on prayer and humility became classics of devotional literature, and Murray is not gentle on the subject of pride. He writes about the way that self-sufficiency, the insistence that I can manage this on my own, I do not need help, I am fine, is not a strength but an illness. He writes about it as a kind of spiritual blindness that prevents a person from receiving the very things they most need, because receiving requires a kind of openness and vulnerability that self-sufficiency refuses. This is an uncomfortable message. It is meant to be, because the people who most need to hear it are precisely the ones most likely to resist it, the capable ones, the accomplished ones, the ones who have made their way in the world through intelligence and discipline and sheer force of will, and have perhaps, without quite realizing it, started to believe that they are the source of their own strength rather than the channel through which strength flows. Murray and Tileston together say, gently but clearly, there is more available to you than you are currently accessing, but accessing it requires a posture you may not be used to. It requires the open hand instead of the clenched fist. It requires the admission that you are not enough on your own, which is not a defeat, but a door. And then there is the theme of forgiveness, which November also carries. Tileston returns to this in several entries, drawing from diverse sources, because she seems to understand that unforgiveness is one of the heaviest things a person can carry, and one of the most common things people insist on carrying anyway. She includes the insight, shared by multiple writers across different centuries, that forgiveness is not primarily something you do for the person who wronged you. It is something you do for yourself. The image that recurs across these pages is of a prisoner who holds the key to their own cell, and who, for reasons of pain or pride or the sense that releasing the prisoner would somehow let them off the hook, refuses to use it. There is a deep compassion in the way Tileston treats this subject. She does not minimize what was done. She does not tell you that what happened to you is not that bad or that you should be over it by now. She simply points out that the carrying of it is costing you something you cannot afford to keep spending, and that there is another way, not an easy way, not a way that erases what happened, but a way that lets you walk forward instead of staying fixed in the moment of injury, reliving it, building your identity around it, letting it define what you are capable of and what you deserve. Forgiveness, in the world of this book, is not an event. It is a practice. You choose it once, and then you choose it again, and probably again after that, because the feeling does not change overnight. But each time you choose it, something shifts, and eventually, one day, you realize the weight is lighter than it used to be. Not gone, maybe, but lighter. And lighter is enough to begin with. December, the final month, is where Tileston brings everything together in a way that feels completely natural and completely fitting. The days are darkest now, and she leans into that rather than away from it. She understands something about the end of a year that is spiritually true and psychologically real. Endings are not failures. They are completions. And completion, even of something hard, is something to honor. The December entries are warm and reflective and full of a kind of tender hope that has been earned by everything that came before it. By now, if you have been reading all year, you have sat with the cold and the waiting and the grief and the challenge and the community and the hard questions. And now you arrive at December not as the same person you were in January, though you might not be able to say exactly what has changed. Something has shifted in the center of things. You are maybe a little less afraid, a little more trusting, a little more able to tell the difference between what matters and what merely feels urgent. Tileston closes the year with an emphasis on hope, but it is not the fragile, wishful kind of hope that depends on things going well. It is the sturdier kind. The kind that has been tested and has held. The kind that says, I do not know what next year will bring. I have no guarantees. But I have seen in the pages of this year and in the depths of my own experience that there is something that holds, something that provides, something that does not run out. And that is enough to walk into the future with. She includes, in the final days of December, quotations that speak specifically to the new year ahead, to the unknown and the fresh and the possibilities not yet formed. There is an energy in these pages that feels like standing at a window in the early morning, watching the dark give way to something lighter, not yet sure what the day will bring, but trusting that it will bring enough. Now, I want to pull back and look at the whole of what Mary Tileston created, because I think it is worth saying plainly, this is not just a book of nice quotes. It is a curriculum, a year-long curriculum in the art of living. And what it teaches across 365 days adds up to something that is genuinely transformative for anyone willing to engage with it seriously. The first lesson is about the nature of strength itself. Most of us think of strength as something we accumulate, like a bank account, and then draw from when we need it. We try to build our reserves to get strong enough to make ourselves capable enough to handle whatever comes. And Tileston, gently and persistently over the course of an entire year, offers a different model. She suggests that strength is not something you store up. It is something you receive fresh each day for that day's needs. The Latin phrase she often alludes to is manna in the wilderness, the story from Scripture of the people who were told to gather only what they needed for one day, because if they tried to store extra, it would spoil. She uses that image as a metaphor for grace, for strength, for the spiritual resources that keep us going. You cannot stockpile them. You can only receive them as they are given. And they are given every morning without fail in exactly the measure that the day requires. This might sound like a recipe for anxiety, because if you cannot stockpile, then you are always at risk of running out. But the point is exactly the opposite. If the supply is renewed every morning, then you never actually run out. You only think you might, based on what your eyes can see, which is only today's portion. The worry comes from trying to calculate whether you will have enough for next week and next month, when in fact, next week's portion is not available yet. It will be. It always has been. But it is not here today, because today is not next week. This is the central psychological and spiritual gift of this book, the practice of presentness, of staying in the day that is actually happening rather than the ones that have already passed or the ones that have not yet arrived. That practice over the course of a year of daily reading becomes habitual. And a habit of presence is one of the most genuinely freeing things a human being can cultivate. The second major lesson of the book is what we might call the theology of enoughness. Over and over, across every season and every month, Tileston returns to the idea that what you have right now, in this moment, is enough. Not that it is everything you want. Not that it is everything you might eventually need, but that for today, for this moment, there is enough. There is enough light to take the next step. There is enough strength to do the next thing. There is enough grace to get through whatever this hour requires. This is a message that sounds simple and proves to be one of the most radical things a person can believe. Because most of our anxiety, when you trace it to its root, is not actually about what is happening right now. It is about what might happen next. It is about whether the thing we need will be there when we need it. Whether we will be strong enough, brave enough, resourced enough to face whatever is coming. And the answer that this book gives again and again across 365 different entries and voices and angles of approach is the same: yes. When you need it, it will be there. It has always been there. It will continue to be there. Not because you are deserving enough or faithful enough or disciplined enough, but because that is simply the nature of the supply. The third lesson is about community and connection, which we touched on in the October section but which runs as a thread through the entire year. Tileston believes and demonstrates through her selection of quotations that no one was meant to make this journey alone. Not even the most independent among us, not even the strongest. The book is itself a kind of community, actually. It gathers voices from across centuries and cultures and traditions and brings them all to the same table, and as you read them, you realize that you are not alone, not just because God is with you, but because millions of human beings before you have walked through exactly what you are walking through and have found their way. Their words are evidence. Their perseverance is proof. There is something deeply comforting about that. Not the comfort that comes from having your problems solved, but the comfort that comes from knowing you are not the first person to have them. You are not unusual in your struggle. You are not uniquely broken. You are human, which means you are exactly as fragile and exactly as resilient as every other person who has ever lived. And both of those things are true at the same time, and that is okay. The fourth lesson, and perhaps the most challenging one, is about surrender. Not giving up, not passivity, not the kind of surrender that means you stop caring or stop trying, but the surrender that is the opposite of control, the release of the exhausting, futile attempt to manage outcomes that are not yours to manage. Tileston, through the mystics and the writers and the theologians she quotes, makes a consistent case for the idea that the tightest grip on your life produces the most suffering, and that an open hand, while it feels more vulnerable, actually receives far more. This is not easy to practice. It is probably the work of a lifetime. But the book offers, day after day, a small invitation to try it just for today, to hold today's worries a little more loosely, to trust a little more than yesterday, to release a little of the control that was always an illusion anyway. And over time, those small daily practices of surrender accumulate into something real, something that changes the quality of your life, not because your circumstances have improved, though they may, but because your relationship to your circumstances has transformed. I want to also say something about the literary quality of this book, because it matters, and it is often overlooked when people discuss it. Tileston was an exceptional curator. She had an eye for language that was not only true but beautiful, and the quotations she selected across the entire year have a cumulative aesthetic effect that is genuinely moving. Reading this book is not just a spiritual experience, it is a literary one. You encounter minds and voices that stretch you, that show you new angles on old truths, that use language in ways that stick in your memory long after the page is closed. George Herbert's poetry, for instance, appears several times, and Herbert has a way of talking about the spiritual life that is intimate and warm without ever being sentimental. He writes about God the way you write about someone you actually know, someone you've argued with and been disappointed by and returned to, someone whose presence in your life is not theoretical but actual and daily and sometimes inconvenient. That intimacy, in the middle of a devotional book, is startling and precious. Or Fenelon, the French archbishop whose spiritual letters are some of the most psychologically astute writings in Christian history. Fenelon understood the human ego with such precision that his writings feel less like theology and more like good therapy, the kind that does not let you off the hook but does it with such gentleness that you barely notice you are being challenged. Tileston chose him often and well. And then there is Hannah Whittle Smith, who I mentioned earlier, whose ability to make abstract spiritual truths feel domestic and applicable and possible is remarkable. She writes about faith the way someone might write about baking bread, not mysterious or remote, but learned and practiced and something any ordinary person can do. In a genre that often tends toward the elevated and the abstract, Smith's presence in Tileston's pages is grounding and real. All of these voices together create a text that is far richer than any single author could have produced. Tileston's genius was not in writing, it was in listening, in reading centuries of human wisdom and knowing which parts were most needed, most true, most likely to help someone who was struggling to get through a difficult day. That is a gift that is underappreciated and undervalued, and she used it in service of something genuinely important. Now, let us think about who this book is for. The easy answer is that it is for religious people, for Christians in the traditional sense, because most of its quotations come from that tradition. and that is partly true. There is explicit faith language throughout. There is scripture, there is prayer, there is the vocabulary of a particular tradition of belief. If that tradition is entirely foreign and hostile to you, some of the book may feel like it is not speaking your language. But I would push back gently on the idea that this limits the book's audience as much as one might think, because the core concerns of this book are not sectarian. They are human. The question of how to find strength when you are exhausted is not a religious question. The question of how to wait without losing hope is not a religious question. The question of how to forgive someone who has hurt you, or how to stop comparing yourself to others, or how to be present in your life instead of absent from it, none of these are questions that only belong to people of a particular faith. They are questions that belong to all of us, and Tileston's answers, while they are framed in a specific tradition, point to something that transcends the framing. The substance underneath the language is universal: trust over control, presence over anxiety, community over isolation, gratitude over complaint, surrender over striving. These are not ideas that belong to one religion or one century. They are principles that show up across traditions and cultures because they are true to something fundamental about how human beings flourish. So I would say this book is for anyone who is carrying something heavy and wants to carry it a little differently. Anyone who wants to stop feeling like they are barely surviving and start, even just a little, feeling like they're actually living. Anyone who is tired of the noise and the rush and the constant pressure to do more and be more and have more, and who suspects, rightly, that there is another way. We are moving toward the end of our time together with this book, and I want to come back to something I said at the very beginning, because I think it is the thing most worth remembering. This book does not shout, it does not demand, it does not set impossible standards or create a checklist that, if you complete it, will guarantee your life will be better. It simply shows up, day after day, with a fresh word for a fresh day, and says, here is something true, here is something that has held other people. It might hold you too. There is a kind of reading that changes you, and it does not always announce itself as it is happening. You keep showing up, you keep reading the page, and somewhere over the course of weeks and months, you notice that the way you are walking through your days has shifted. You are a little slower, a little more deliberate. You are a little less likely to spiral into anxiety at the first sign of trouble. You are a little more willing to ask for help, to admit what you do not know, to trust that the morning will bring what the morning needs to bring. That is what Daily Strength, for Daily Needs, has been doing for readers for well over 100 years. It is not a dramatic book. It does not have a plot twist or a shocking revelation. What it has is something rarer and more durable than drama. It has wisdom, gathered from the best minds across centuries, held together by a woman who understood that human beings need not just information, but company on the journey. And it offers that company in the form of a small daily reading that takes no more than 5 minutes but can, over time, change the shape of an entire life. There was a woman who read this book for 40 years. She started reading it when she was 30, newly married, moving to a new city far from everyone she loved, quietly terrified about the future. A friend had given it to her as a wedding gift, and she had thought it was a slightly dull and old-fashioned present. She put it on the shelf. 3 months later, in the middle of a particularly hard week, she took it down. She read one entry, then the next day she read another, and then she kept going. She kept going for 40 years. She raised 4 children reading it. She buried her husband reading it. She watched her children grow and make their choices and sometimes break her heart and sometimes fill it reading it. And when she was 70 and someone asked her what had kept her steady through all of it, what had kept her from the bitterness that so often comes to people who have lived long and hard, she said it was simple. Every morning, before anything else, she read one page. One small page that reminded her, today's strength is for today. Tomorrow will have its own. You do not have to carry it all at once. You never did. You never do. That, in the end, is the whole book. Everything else is elaboration. Every quotation, every scripture, every voice from every century is saying some version of that same thing. You are held. Not because you have earned it, or because you will never fail, or because your faith is perfect or your life is in order. You are held simply because that is the nature of the love that is larger than any of your mistakes or your fears or your failures. And that love meets you every morning with exactly what you need for that day. Nothing more, nothing less, but always, reliably, inexhaustibly, enough. If this summary has meant something to you, if it has offered you a moment of quiet or a thought you needed, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the Audiobook Library channel. Your support quite literally keeps this work alive. Every like, every new subscriber, every share helps us reach more people who might be searching for exactly this. We put real time and genuine care into everything we offer here, and knowing that it is reaching you and resonating with you makes all of it worthwhile. So thank you. Genuinely, thank you. And while you are here, please do take a look at the other videos in our library. We have summaries of some of the most meaningful books ever written. Books that have shaped people, changed lives, offered comfort and challenge and wisdom across centuries. Whether you are looking for something spiritual or practical, something philosophical, or something deeply personal, there is very likely something in our collection that will speak to wherever you are today. Browse through, find what calls to you, and come back tomorrow for something new. Because that is what we are here for. Not to replace the books, but to open the door. To give you a taste, to introduce you to voices you might not have found on your own. To be the friend who says, you need to know about this. This one is worth your time. Daily Strength for Daily Needs is more than worth your time. It is, for many people who have found it, one of the books they return to year after year because it gives more each time than it gave the last. Because you are different each January than you were the one before, and so the words that were just words last year become something you understand now from the inside. That is how the best books work. They grow with you. They are not finished with you after one reading. They stay. So find a copy. Start in whatever month it currently is. Open to today's entry and read it slowly, without rushing. See what it offers. Give it a week. Give it a month. And then, when you find yourself reaching for it every morning, not because you have to, but because something in you genuinely wants to, because those 5 minutes have become the part of your day that helps all the other parts make sense, you will understand what Mary Tileston understood when she put this collection together more than a century ago. That we all need something that meets us where we are every single day and says, you are not alone. You are not without resources. You are not left to figure this out entirely on your own. You have today's strength for today's needs, and today's strength is always exactly enough.